Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Can't beat a bit of thunder to set the ambience for a podcast. A big warm welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Now, one of the things I love about recording this show is that I get to hear some fantastic stories that inspire me, and I also hope that it will inspire you wherever you're listening to this podcast, wherever you are in the world. Now, today's guest is like so many that I've had the privilege of speaking with, and that he has come across a big frustration, big friction or pain point, and rather than complain about it, he's done something about it. And it's one of those stories that I just love to hear. But I am very careful not to reveal too much information or spoilers because I know how sensitive you guys are to that kind of thing. So buckle up, hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Florida so we can speak with founder, president and CEO of Atlantic.net, Marty Puranik. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Marty. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Marty Puranik, but most people know me as Marty. I'm the founder and currently the president and CEO of Atlantic.net. What that means is I help run the day-to-day operations and keep the lights on and kind of plot our path forward through as the industry changes and kind of adapt to the times that the industry is going through.
Now, to many people listening, Atlantic.net is a leading cloud hosting solutions provider. But I'm interested in your inspiring backstory too. So I want to take you back to the mid-1990s at the University of Florida, where internet services were scarce. We've all got bad nightmares of those dial-up days as well. But I mean, out of frustration, due to the lack of internet access around campus, you set out to become your own internet service provider. So in order to pay for that internet service, you ran a computer repair shop out of your dorm room at the University of Florida. And you weren't out to change the world, you just wanted internet access. I mean, I love this story about your humble beginnings. And I think it's going to inspire so many people listening at the beginning of their own startup journey too. So can you expand a little on that story?
Yeah, sure. We were, it was a group of us that were in computer science together. And at that time, even to get basic internet access, you had to be in a computer science program or you had to be doing something computer related. So it wasn't even you could get internet access as a student. You had to not only be a student, but you had to be on campus doing something with in the computer science department or taking some kind of undergraduate computer science course. So obviously we discovered the internet there and we were like, this is fantastic. This is amazing. Email was amazing, and it was neat to see how quickly you could communicate with people all over the world. And it was neat because a lot of the international academic community was also connected. So you would be communicating with people in California, to Sweden, to Australia, or wherever. So we thought it was going to be something amazing. It was going to change the world, which ultimately it was true. And at that time, it wasn't considered, I guess, internet was not considered a right. And it was something that was to be measured and metered and, given out to people, as a special use type product. And we didn't see the internet going that way. We saw it as more of the mainstream product. So we had lobbied to add free internet access for all students, and we really weren't successful at that. So we said, hey, you know what? We'll go out and start our own internet company. So none of us had any business experience. We were all in our late teens or early 20s. So we said, how are we going to bring in money to do this? Because to get internet connection was pretty expensive, and just setting up the whole thing was pretty expensive when you're starting with nothing. So we said, well, we knew how to build computers at that time, so that's what we started out doing. So we built and sold computers to kind of fund the internet company. And it was interesting because the first year we started as a company called Internet Connect Company, but we didn't actually have any internet access. So people would come in and say, well, where's your internet access if you're an internet company? So we changed the name to ICC Computers. Because people were saying you're selling computers but not internet. But about a year later, we got our first internet connection, and things took off from there.
you forget just how far we've come. I mean, you were talking there about the ability to send a message to California in seconds and how new and fantastic that felt. And here we are now, 20 odd years, 30 odd years later, and we're actually having a conversation, recording that conversation, and then beaming it straight to 165 countries. It's insane, isn't it, how far we've progressed?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really amazing when you look at even, for example, an iPad where you're having wireless video calls, right? You're sending your image through the air into the internet, somewhere out the other side of the internet to another wireless device, whether it's a mobile phone or iPad or whatever. And it's become such an integrated part of life, you don't even realize what's happening. So it is amazing.
Now, another great aspect of your story is how the industry has evolved, and Atlantic had to actually pivot to offer data center services. And then I think later you added managed hosting, cloud and virtualization tools too. But can you tell me about that moment where you felt you had to pivot? I mean, was that a scary moment?
Yeah, I mean, running a business is always scary.
Yeah.
It's kind of having a business, kind of, you just get some calm between the storms. But we were providing internet access, and we were pretty successful at that. We had expanded all the way from Florida up to North Carolina to the east coast of Texas, was our service area. And at that time, there was a new president, which was George Bush, and he appointed the head of the FCC, who became Michael Powell, who was Colin Powell's son. Basically, you could kind of read the tea leaves and say, hey, this is not going to be a friendly environment for what we do. And policy after policy kept coming out, making it more and more difficult for us to provide internet services. And at that time, there were probably over 1,000 internet service providers in the U.S. And the U.S. Kind of went on a tangent in terms of a policy decision compared to Europe, where I believe there's still many, many internet providers today, where they kind of consolidated the whole internet space. So we saw that happening, and we said, well, we can't do what we're doing anymore. They're going to consolidate this. So we obviously were very passionate about internet. So we said, hey, let's get onto the hosting side of the business. At that time, this was post 2001, but the tech bubble had burst. The 1999 tech bubble had burst. So there were some data centers that were available, and we were able to pick one up in Florida that were built, obviously for a different mindset. And at that time, which is once again sounds funny today, in 2002, a lot of people thought that the internet was kind of a flash in the pan. It was going to go away. It was just something that was trendy, and it wasn't really going to go mainstream. So a lot of these data center assets were really, really inexpensive because they were also kind of proprietary and developed specifically for providing hosting type of solutions. So you had to make sure there was going to be an industry behind that. But we always believed there would be, and we had seen some other people have some success with it. So we kind of jumped into it ourselves, and we got into the data center business. And that probably took off about a year after we got into it. It grew gradually, and then it slowly gathered steam and turned into a nice business.
It really has as well. I mean, I believe you guys now run data centers in New York, London, Toronto, San Francisco, Dallas, and Orlando. And it's widely known as a trusted hosting and cloud service provider. But what do you think it is that actually makes you stand out here in 2018?
I think the customers that we're most happy with are the most happy with us. And we're getting a lot of traction with our customers that tend to be business to business. And, we spend a lot of time in this industry all day, and it's hard to keep up for us. So when we look at our customers that are in industries that have nothing to do with technology, it'd be really, really hard without a partner like us kind of guiding them or letting them know, like, hey, this is what's coming up, or, these are some threats you should be aware of, or whether they're new products that are, coming down the pipe that you should be aware of. And that's not just necessarily to make a sale today, but just so the customer is aware, how the industry's changed, because it's so fluid, whether it's just compliance or regulatory in nature. In Europe, you've got GDPR coming up. Yeah. In the U.S., there's obviously a lot of talk now because of a lot of this Facebook news that they're going to implement some kind of privacy rules here. So you have to stay on top of that and be compliant and, make sure that you're providing services in a way that's a win-win for everybody. And it's interesting, as an example, just recently, probably this year, it was always thought of having customer data was an asset, and probably this year now it's considered a liability. So it's completely changed almost in the period of 6 months.
So you have been on quite an incredible journey here. So I've got to ask, you did say that running a business is always stressful and you have to navigate through those calms before the storm. Mm-hmm. But is there anything that you'd wish someone told you before you actually started a company?
Yeah, I think the most important, I wouldn't say the most important thing, but I think one of the things that's really, really interesting that I wish somebody had told me is that when I was growing up, the idea was I went to high school, then I was going to college, and then I was going to go get a job. And the rule of thumb for that, if you're going to go get a job, is that you want to be a specialist at something, which is if you're going to be an accountant, then, you kind of live in that world of accounting and balance sheets and income statements and cash flows and so on. If you're in marketing, you know how to make a marketing plan, so on and so forth. If you're going to be an engineer, you obviously have to know the technology you're going to be working with. So generally speaking, when you go, most people end up being specialists in whatever they're doing in life. So the difference is if you're going to have your own business, it's pretty much the opposite. You have to become a generalist. So you're going to be really good at whatever it is that you already do, but you have to become at least proficient enough to talk to the accountants or to the banks in terms of about your cash flows if you need to get a loan. You need to talk to advertising agencies, or if you're going to be by marketing, you need to be able to speak their language so that you can navigate and get a good deal in terms of the marketing impressions that you want. So you have to be good at what you do, but you have to at least become average or better than average at everybody else's jobs, just so that you can be able to communicate and do what you need to do to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that rather than being a specialist, if you're going to run a business, you have to be more of a generalist. You have to be able to put your toes in the water in all the other departments and at least hold a conversation so you can move, your entity forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, one of the things that I hate and my biggest downfall, my Achilles heel, is accounting that you mentioned there. The whole subject leaves me cold. But like you say, you have to step up to it, don't you?
Yeah, you definitely do. And while we may not always enjoy all the different aspects of business, you have to at least be able to talk the talk so that even if you're not the one doing it, the person that's doing it can communicate with you effectively in terms of what you want done.
Now, none of us can achieve any amount of success without a little help along the way. So I've got to ask again, is there any particular person out there who you're grateful towards who helped you get where you are today?
Yeah, we had a couple of partners when we started out. They're not here anymore for different reasons.
Yeah.
There's one in particular, his name was Jose Sanchez. And in the early days, it wasn't like it is today where it's kind of, startups and everything's glorified. It was about having a business and kind of having your own space and doing your own thing. So in the early days, there's no valuations of, you couldn't raise $500,000 on an idea at that time. So we had to work really, really hard. I mean, I'd be working really hard where if I opened up the back of the computer, I'd be like, my hand would be shaking because I hadn't eaten all day.
Yeah.
In the same way, Jose was right there with me. And I remember he used to work. We weren't really making any money at that point. So he used to bus tables at night at Texas Roadhouse. So he would work with me during the day, and then he'd have to go to his other job. And he would be so tired, he was busting tables, and he told me he leaned against the wall and fell asleep because he was we're both so exhausted. So, you're working so hard and you're not making any money, and you don't know if you ever are going to make any money. So there's such a big leap of faith you have, and there's such a amount of trust you have with that other person because you're going through it together. And I also realize, like, no matter what happens at all, wherever this whole thing ends up taking us, it's, if it wasn't for, people like him along the way, we wouldn't be where we are today.
I'm so glad you shared that story, because I think all too often now in this age of instant gratification, people look at someone such as yourself with an incredibly successful business and everything that you've achieved and just judge you by your success right now. But nobody sees those days where you were busting tables and falling asleep, do they?
I mean, they're just exhausted.
So what are your biggest challenges and opportunities at Atlantic here in 2018? You must be facing quite a few. I mean, you've mentioned the data thing there.
Yeah, I mean, it's making sure our customers are compliant, are aware of their, some of the opportunities and challenges that are happening with tech. I mean, everything, there's just the general trend towards everything moving online. So you just want to make sure that your customers are doing things in the best way possible, and you're giving them the advice that they want. And it really depends on where the customer's at. If the customer's, let's say, a venture-funded startup, their needs are very different than, let's say, a hospital that's been established for 20 or 30 years. So depending on where they are in their IT journey, we want to make sure we're giving them advice or putting them in the right product so that they're going to have success with whatever they're trying to do.
So as for yourself, what's your primary focus for Atlantic? And do you see a point where you're going to need to pivot again in the near future, or is that too far off yet?
Yeah, I think our biggest challenge, like internally, I would say, is just there's so much confusion in the marketplace and there's so much hype, and it's kind of bringing people down to earth or being able to talk to people in a rational way to achieve whatever their goals are. And we have to do a really good job of communicating in terms of our value proposition, what we're bringing to the table, because inevitably, when you're selling on the internet, especially, there's always going to be somebody who's cheaper than you. And there's always going to be somebody who's way more expensive than you too. So you have to kind of say, well, here's the value we provide, and those companies that charge a lot more than us provide a different type of value that might be very valuable to a different set of customers. And similarly, there's companies that compete more in the commoditized space where price might be really, really important. So you just want to be talking to the right customers and solving the right problems for them. So, for example, if we have a customer that comes in and says, I'm primarily price motivated, that's probably not the best customer for us. Our best customers are more like, we need a solution, or we need help with this, or we need this project to get done. Versus a customer that says, I know everything I need, and I know I need to get the absolute best price because, I've got only 6 months of venture funding left, and I got to make this thing take off. So in that case, it's probably better. You can shop around online and find a cheaper source than us in that case. But I would say it's really, really important for us to position ourselves to find the right customer and the right customer to work with us.
Now, I'm sure that we're going to have a lot of listeners out there that you've inspired with your story and want to take a similar path, or they're at various stages. If there is anyone listening, whether they just want advice or more information about what you guys are doing there, can you just point them in the direction of how they can contact a member of your team, and just remind them of your website details as well?
Sure. You can check us out on www.atlantic.net. And we have a contact us page there, so it has our phone numbers, emails, and all the departments you'd want to contact us. And if you want to talk to me, you can just send it into an email and just forward it to me.
Fantastic. Well, I love your story, where it began with your frustration due to that lack of internet access around a university campus, and how you turned that negative into a positive, and how it got you where you are today. So a big, big thank you for coming on and sharing that story with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I just absolutely love everything about Marty's story there. For a tech startup story, it really had it all for me. The frustration, the humble beginnings, falling asleep, exhausted, waiting tables to keep that vision alive, keep that business moving forward, enjoying fantastic success, followed by the pivot. If they made a film about tech startups, that should be it, let me tell you. So a genuine thank you to Marty for coming on today and sharing that story. And I really do hope it inspires you to do something too, no matter where in the world you're listening to this. Now, I do have some pretty big news to announce. I'm heading to Nashville to cover the Marketing United event soon. So if you are a listener in Nashville, let me know and I'll buy you a cold beer. And maybe we could go to a honky-tonk bar, live out my dream and pour me a whiskey in a dirty glass. I want to tick that off my bucket list. So if you know anyone that can make that happen, we can do that too. Now, we're also approaching 500 episodes, and I want to invite you all to record and send me a virtual voicemail so we can see how far this message, this podcast is reaching around the world. So feel free to send them in. You can tweet them to me at Neil C. Hughes, or email them me directly to techblogwriter@outlook.com. And if you go to my website, techblogwriter.co.uk, navigate to podcasts, and you'll find a nice easy way to record and send me a virtual voicemail too. But before I go, I just wanted to say I really appreciate you tuning into the show. It's a privilege having you here on board and having me being a soundtrack to part of your life, no matter where you are. And you know what? Let's come back tomorrow and do it all again. But all that's left for me to say now is thanks for listening, guys. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.